All the listeners, all the viewers, welcome once again to the Design Culture Learning Series, Part 2. As you would be, all the attendants who are there who have been regularly attending, you'll know that this is the third week of the DCLS 2. The first was on creativity, where we had three speakers. The second was on society. And today, it's the harmonious livability. And this is the third session in harmonious livability. And next week, we shall have design leadership. Now, what the DCLS, the Design Culture Learning Program, is about, just once again for any new listeners or any new viewers, is that it was conceived during the pandemic last year and by B.ARCH College of Design and Business in Jaipur, generally in order to enthuse aspiring design students and whoever else, not just students, but anyone else interested, with real life design related case studies, projects, and experiences by industry professionals, educationists, entrepreneurs, experts, and others, other stalwarts of the field. Last year, Arch had conducted 16 such sessions over a period of 4 weeks in the same categories. And these are all curated on YouTube channel, and anyone willing can go through that. And there is a very deep, insightful learning in that too. It's also been transcribed into a book format for easy reference. So that's another good part of this series. Now, today marks, like I said, 3 and 3, 6, 7, 8. I think today marks the last session on harmonious livability, and we have a very special guest with us, architect Rajagopalan Palamadai. Now, Raja is, I've known Raja for quite some time, and he's not just a prominent architect, but a very well-respected senior architect who has had his education in some of the most foremost architectural universities of the world, one being the Center for Environment Planning and Technology in Ahmedabad, and the other one at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in the United States. He has been working on very, very interesting, very inspiring projects, which Raja will roll us through. And I would strongly recommend that you be intently involved in his presentation, and there'll be a lot of learning for those aspiring designers or architects or whoever is present here. And one more thing about the Arch College of Design and Business, it's been in the pedagogy of design for the last over 22 years, and it's acclaimed to be one of the foremost design colleges of the state and country. And recently it also won an award for the same. And of course, now with the director Archana Surana ji, who has been recently inducted into the Cumulus Association, on the board of Cumulus Association. The design education at Arch is bound to see a further elevation in its pedagogic mission. So, Raja, I welcome you, and on behalf of Arch, and the stage is all yours. You can commence with your presentation. Welcome, Raja.
Thank you. Thank you, Bhargav. Such a pleasure to be on this platform. Thank you all who are on this I keep remembering, I mean, I keep saying on a call, but in this, whatever it is. So let me start sharing my screen straight away. The idea here is, I mean, I'm assuming I'm talking to designer, it doesn't matter whoever it is. The single most important activity for a designer, apart from code designing, is also to make increase the awareness for design in the society, in the environment or the ecosystem wherein you work. It's extremely important that people are sensitive to design, because you may still have clients, but not enlightened clients. So the important thing is to make that possible. So I'll start now sharing my screen as part of my presentation. Now, the title of my presentation is what is called Design Matters. Now, it's the reason why I chosen to call it Design Matters will become evident as I move along the presentation. As far as in my, I'm apart from being a consultant, I've been engaged with teaching for a long time, helping set up amongst emerging schools, helping them set up at one point of time, now the established schools. Of course, off and on, I keep teaching as a adjunct faculty because I lecture both here and outside India as well. Now, on the subject of design. Now, the content for my presentation is three parts to that. First is overview of design education and profession. I think this is very important. Of course, I'm taking the case study of architecture, but anybody who is, I mean, anybody could pick up the thing for design, management, physics, chemistry, any subject. But I've taken the case study of architecture, partly because I am an architect and I've been working with some of the schools of architecture here. So that's the reason I pick up architecture, but it could be done for any design profession in general in India. Then I'll come back to what do I mean by design matters, but examples from three companies over a period of time: Olivetti, IBM, and Apple, to show how do the design matters get translated in operations of certain large companies over the last many years. Then also, in particular, I want to touch real estate for a different reason. It is always assumed that design doesn't matter in real estate. It's just driven by narrow profit consideration, which is not true, because I'm going to come with some examples where you wouldn't know it unless I tell you it's a real estate project. New York Times building is a real estate project. People wouldn't know it. People know it as a New York Times building, but done by a developer and leased out to New York Times. New York Times is a tenant in that building. And then what has happened in India in terms of design? Quick review of what has happened since independence. And the last, of course, is a couple of projects where, of course, I was involved, where it, again, to illustrate how design matters and also how design is also good business, coming through illustrated to two projects which I've been involved with in the last 5 years. So that's the content is goes. So now, design education and profession. I mean, it's fascinating. I didn't realize till I did. Of course, this is just a preliminary study. I'm sure there's a lot more one can do, but it is also a fascinating insight into how education in particular in architecture works. This was some time ago. Now there are close to, I have not had a count, but I'm sure design schools, the way one looks at it, one can see that it's also mushrooming. But there are, in spite of all the regulations and all the other things that govern establishment of School of Architecture, there are close to 469, let's say almost 500 schools. Assuming a very conservative 30 people who graduate from each school, we're talking about 15,000 people who are architects who graduate every year. If you look at the number of registered architects in India, for example, is 67,000. Imagine 15,000 people are getting added to a pool of 67,000 every year. But it's a huge number that gets added to this 67,000. And I'm sure now these numbers in terms of the proportion can't be very different for any design field, whether it is product design, textile, any of these design schools probably will be very similar to the kind of, that is what I'm saying, 15,000 gets added to 67,000 is almost 25% people getting added every year. Now that's a lot of architects. I'm sure it's whatever it is for designers as well. Now, but what is it? It looks very overpowering that so many architects are getting added to the pool every year. But what is interesting is also it's a very young, in spite of being such an old profession, it is still a very young profession in India, where you see most of the people registered architects are under the age of 35. So imagine this is like the work. It is very typical in India, for example, when you take the workforce of India, when people talk about the opportunities in India, is also that you have a demography which is fantastic for opportunities. We have, imagine 60 to 65% of all the architects are under the age of 35. This is a young profession. That means it's full of opportunities. That's in spite of adding so many each year. So in short, it's a young profession. But what is also interesting, I'm sure somebody can do this for any other profession. I'll come to that. See, if you look at the population versus architects, if you look at various China, Brazil, you can see that we still need a lot more architects. But at the same time, the architects who are here would say, or even designer would say, that there are not enough clients. But if you see the numbers, there is a potential. Now, perhaps we are not able to sensitize people as to why they need an architect, why do we need a designer. Once we are able to look at Italy, 1:400 as opposed to 1:20,000. And if you look at even a casual conversation, forget about deep research. People talk about, Milan for fashion. Even some people want to buy some shoes. They'll say this is Italian shoes. You go to some shop in Bangkok, the guy tailor will tell you this is Italian fabric. So you can imagine how design has penetrated in Italy, how the demand for design exists in Italy. It is not just limited to building, not limited it could be a product, it could be fashion, it could be textile, it could be shoes, leather, anything. So obviously there are people in Italy which the sensitivity among the people must be so high that they could afford to have so many designers amongst them. So it's all of us refer to, many of us want to, we all know as a designers, irrespective of what you design, you want to be in Italy. Even food designers would want to be in Italy. So many people talk about going to Italy and so on. So you can see what the thing is, how to get people to buy or to get them to like design, want design. So that's what I'm saying. How do we get to where Italy is? Spread the word, design matters. Now, it's important. So how do we harness the potential? How do we getting more and more people on board design, convincing more and more people, rich or poor, young or old, that design matters in day-to-day life? How do we do this? Then if we are able to do that, it's easy game as far as servicing that demand is concerned. First is, how do we create a demand? There's an old story. For example, you take Pepsi and Coca-Cola. They said they don't compete to begin with. They work together to increase your consumption of Coca-Cola. Not Coca-Cola, they increase your consumption of cola. And they know if they're able to convince people to have cola, it has to be shared between these two people. So the first objective is, how do you increase consumption of cola in a population? Then opportunities exist for both of them. So once there is a sensitivity and demand for design, And there is opportunities for everybody who is catering to that demand. The first is, how does one sensitize society, sensitize? So obviously we need to take this kind of conversation beyond classrooms, beyond design schools, into the cities, into the engage with the people who live in the cities, people who manage cities, people poor, rich, whatever they are. How do we and get the city to demand good design in any sphere of life, in whether it's public spaces, whether it is private spaces or personal spaces, personal embodiments, so on. Where did I get this idea from? This was recently. Many people would have seen the station, which has been Montreal train station, which is renovated by Skidmore, Ings and Merrill. The managing director put up a post, and I'll come to that. I'll show you an image of what the station looks like. But he said it's a public place. So it's extremely important, more so in public spaces. Why? It's another classic example of, he said it reminds him of why design matters. And I'm glad that it's in reference to a public space. See, this is a post office that was transformed into a train hall. Now, it's I've not seen this building, though I was somewhere nearby, but I didn't see it. But I'm told it's a fantastic space. It is retrofitting something else. It is itself a major thing, and it's a great place to be in. So it is the city that it's an element which is used in the city that demands high quality of design engagement with the designers as well as the consumers of the design. So now I'll come back to what the second half of the story. I want to talk about 3 companies. Now, these 3 companies, all of us know these 3 companies. They have been engaged in many things. Some of, depending on for example, if you are a consumer, probably you've been in touch with you've been engaged with the iPhone on a day-to-day thing. You would know what an iPhone or an Olivetti, if you're a product designer in those days, I'm sure it's been something. A typewriter would be part of a Museum of Modern Art exhibition. IBM, many of us will know, many of us may not know that initial stages of IBM, how design was such a critical element in whatever they did. So I'll go up one after another. See, the thing I start with IBM is what we need to also convince people who are recipients of design, who are potential clients, is something which the grandson of the founder of IBM said in a lecture in Philadelphia. He says, good design is good business. People will tell you that design is expensive, blah, blah, blah. But he was the one who coined the word and how it translated into business they were in. He said, good design is good business. If you want to convince a business, you have to convince the business that good design is good business. And therefore, good business, which is maybe public business, private business, whatever business. We need to convince. How do you convince that people who are going to be recipients of your service that this is whatever you're talking about is not just good design, it is also good business? Look at IBM. Start with the logo. Is Paul Rand's popular IBM poster. Now, this is, if imagine this was created in 1981. So it was, I will come to, the IBM is not just designing the computers. You look at it as one, so it is a total thing. They went to one of the finest designers those days to get this IBM poster, right, which is now, of course, a landmark design as far as poster design is concerned. The owner of this is IBM. Now, if you take, I mean, obviously I will not be able to take each and every aspect of what IBM did, but this is one example of what IBM did, because they believed good design is good business. And if you look at the building, the IBM building in New York, which is done by an architect in New York, there again also you will see it's the same thing that goes through everything. During a certain period, whatever they did, design was the focus, because the owner believed that good design is good business. So there was no hard selling required as far as design is concerned in this case. Again, another classic thing one would think is, one can think of, is Olivetti. You can look at, this is from a catalog, Museum Modern Art. It cannot fail, but I want you to, the thing which I've highlighted, well designed. It's pleasant for employees to work in handsomely designed factories. See, the thing is, it was not about designing just the typewriter, designing the buildings, designing the employees, whatever else. And it said, and also said that it is profitable in so many ways, good design. Even perhaps in terms of making money, good design meant that people made more money, which is by adopting and embracing good design. Like lettering in Coca-Cola, trademark of the world, and so on. So Olivetti is another case where it is not limited. I'll come to just one product. It was in the DNA. So IBM, Olivetti, Apple, design is in their DNA. DNA, because the business believed design is critical to their business. This is Olivetti. For people who know, these are the various buildings of Olivetti that they build. There are many more employees housing, office spaces, and so on and so forth. One can look at many such things. I mean, they've had some of the fanciest people designing buildings for them. There's Le Corbusier, there's that, all that. So it will look like some of the fanciest guys have worked on Olivetti buildings as well, not just their typewriter, not just their graphics. Then comes Apple. Of course, this is a more recent example, but all of us know Apple as a design sensitive company, just not the phone, all of us know, of course, but it goes beyond that, whether it is the graphics, whether it is the posters, or whatever people they engage with as the designers they're engaged with all through their life. In fact, the other day, the guy who designed the shop, the retail outlet in Apple, the transparent glass case, he was in Mumbai last Monday, trying to talk to people, meet people. He was so it's like it's everywhere. Look at the retail small shop in New York, which is become almost like a cult design as far as retail is concerned. So it's not just limited to one product, one thing that they do, it's across whatever they do. Of course, something which people, of course, we see more of that product which you use at the most, maybe a retail store, but people also now that look at this building which is done for the Apple headquarters. It's a fascinating building. It's unusual. It's got everything that you can get into the details. It's very sustainable, and blah blah. Everything you can. The idea is not so much about the building. The idea is to say about the product. Perhaps seen the pictures, images of the retail store in New York. Perhaps you may not have seen an image of this building, which is as sensitive to design as any of the things that they do. What I'm trying to say is all these three examples show us that design is not one for a good company. It's not limited to just one aspect of what they do. It runs across. If you see more and more detail, if you look at the letterheads that they did or the other advertising they did, you will see it all across. Obviously, I did not have time to take each and every activity of these companies, but some of us, we know. More recent ones, obviously, something like Apple, we all know anyway, most of, at least, because they touch the consumer centric companies. So you have seen most of what it is. But If you look at this building, go into the detail of how this building was designed, how it is, how it works. It's fascinating, as fascinating as if you look at how Steve Jobs writes about how he designed that Apple iPhone. So this is that retail shop that I was talking about. It's a cult design now. This is the, I was saying this designer was in Mumbai last Monday, but this is, I mean, this is Apple, right? Nobody would design this. So I can see that sensitivity even in a small thing like a retail outlet. Of course, this is not a small thing, but it is relatively small to what they're doing. Now, I want to illustrate thing which reference to the real estate, which I've been, as clients I've been engaged with. Now, real estate, the way we see it here in India, we don't find very often that we don't find real estate having produced anything of noteworthy importance in terms of design. But why is it that we cannot design change this market as well? Why can't we get the real estate? After all, at the end of the day, cities are being built by developers, both private sector as well as the public sector. Between them, they build the cities. This may be government clients, maybe anybody. So how do we sensitize the whole city to make design a city that demands design everything they do? One is you want products, you demand products, design everything, each one of them. So I will now come to because these buildings define the cities where they are. So I've taken an example of all these buildings are New York City. So I'm giving an example of New York City. This is just there are other examples, public places, which has also been superbly designed, which has been demanded and catered to. Now, this is Hearst building. This is again a regular real estate development. It's a real estate development. So they were redoing this building. First of all, begins with, it's designed by Norman Foster. The selection of the designer, selection of the architect itself says a lot about how sensitive the developer is. Starting with that, and then later on developing the brief. These are all developers having developed these buildings. They're iconic buildings, but still done by developers for profit. So these are not mutually exclusive activity. It's not, I'm saying these are iconic buildings done by developers with profit as the motive, but still great designs. This is one of the most first earliest sustainable building in New York City. So yes, it is a sustainable building. It's an iconic design. Still is a very profitable for the developer, and it works very well in the city, at the location. This is the first building in New York City. Is now fairly number of years old. Now, this is the New York Times, designed by Renzo Piano. For people, imagine this is a project in which there was a competition in which we had people like Norman Foster, Renzo Piano, Cesar Pelli, and Frank Gehry competing for a builder project. This is a developer. New York Times is a tenant, so bought the rights to name the building, but it is not, New York Times is not the client for this building. Client is the developer. So imagine a developer in New York, sensitized, even to this, is educated enough or sensitized enough to go to these architects to build a project in New York City. At that time, I said New York Times came later. So to make a landmark building was the objective. And this is again in New York City. So it's not one isolated Hearst example or an isolated example of this New York Times building, but the entire city which is sensitive to design. So one has to work towards maybe one individual group of people. Eventually, obviously, want it to extend to the city and, of course, neighborhood, the city, the nation, and so on and so forth. Of course, World Trade Center, which had, apart from skid mowings and peril, that Richard Rogers, all the fancy. This is not government, this is a private developer. Some images of the same project. That's the included railways, I mean, the subway station, Calatrava thing, which is at the back, white building in the middle, and middle, of course, is the public space with that water falling and so forth. But entire thing is visualized. It's not so much about, I mean, it's one thing, it's good to see all these buildings, but it's also good to understand how this has been visualized by a developer. Developers don't do anything if it makes no sense to them as a business. So obviously, this ecosystem, this cities, this neighborhood demands great design. So the developers also understand that in this ecosystem, you have to develop, you have to deliver a design which is iconic and which is not just, it works with the people. It's not what, it's what people want. So at the end of the day, is what people wanted. So we have to sensitize people at large, businesses at large, city administration, public servants, so on and so forth, to ask and demand the best in what design can offer. But it's not that nothing has happened in India. If you look at from independence, there is a certain way of doing, but we'll see it has happened, but maybe perhaps far and few between. Yes, we have had, but largely public sector patronage, but yes, some private sector patronage. Unlike in some of the earlier markets, we saw it largely private sector patronage. So you see here, there has been works, of course, everybody knows Chandigarh. Here it's a public sector, I mean, a government, a state client, maybe one person with a vision, but essentially a state who is a patron for development to support this design. It's not perhaps a large number of people who demand, but maybe just one or two individuals who had the vision to ask for this and demand this level of design very early in India. So we had seen that. And of course, you have the Indian Institute of Management, which I think it's essentially a private sector client who's well exposed. Again, another example, there are very limited number of examples, but yes, but these are all institution buildings. What you will never see in India, at least not that easily, is an average real estate or any business their profit is given objective. You will not see them getting into demanding high quality of design, because the assumption is design is expensive. Design is expensive and it does not add value to your business. That's something which we need to change, that mindset. How do we convince people, cities, and everybody? Design adds it's unfortunately, it's a soft value, it's not hard value like a balance sheet. But we need to educate people, sensitize people. How do we do it? It's something which is a responsibility of all of it. Nowadays, some of you who may be exposed to management, but we're still talking about even design thinking now in management. It's the way of thinking that brings value to a product, to a building, to a service, to whatever. So that's something which is, educational institutions have, of course, a major role to play. Of the individuals also have associations, all of them have a major role today, but educational institutions have a very major role to play. And not only the immediate neighborhood, but the cities in which they are located as well. Because most of us know all this, the Doshi and there is Korea. Again, most of them are institutional clients that have been supported by institutional client. And very often you'll see basically one or two people who've supported this thing. Again, parliament building, institutional client, state client. So you very hardly see any examples of very limited private support for good design. I think that, however, appears to be changing. And one example is a real estate project, two real estate projects, which I want to refer to. But one is integrated township near Hyderabad, which is never took off. The other is a project in Mumbai. Both are real estate, I said. A project in Mumbai, which is complete, which you see on this image in front of you. That's is complete, delivered and occupied. The first one did not take off, is still on paper. So this is in course. Here I was involved as a design director on behalf of the developer, which is Tishman Spire. It's a global real estate company. The idea was to develop a 400-acre township. Now, the master plan was done by P. Fried along with Doshi, along with Vastu Shilp. One of the finest architects were in. There were several blocks with several architects involved, and in the way, in a spirit of collaboration, the several star architects for each of those parcels. Tom Pfeiffer was doing the office buildings, Studio Gang, Engineering Gang was doing one thing, several people doing several projects. And design was on the core of this project was design, which is because the developer believed that everything else will follow. If you have a great design, a great product, everything else follows. Sustainability, all that, whatever you. This is one of the buildings designed by Studio Genie Gang. Now, of course, star architect, a winner of several awards, based in Chicago. This is one of the parcels which is designed by, like these several parcels designed by several people, each of them star architect on the one. But each of these architects, by talking to each other, so it was not an isolated, it was a collaborative as well. The architects were talking to the other architects. For example, somebody next parcel, there was another architect. So the architects were also, it used to have workshop in which all the architects were present and talking to each other, how this building talked to the building next. It's not the same architect designing all the buildings, but how this building talked to the other buildings on. The entire delivery of this project, it's not just design, but it's also collaborative work of designers. So it is a fantastic project. Unfortunately, did not see the light of the day. But yes, purely, this is a project in design was centric to the project, and the belief that you could have a project which is driven by design. This is not like at the same time you have to walk the talk. This is the same company that delivered all these projects for different parts of the world. Each one of them is an iconic design in whatever part of the world they are. Some of them Brazil, China, Washington, so on and so forth. So the company had a track record. This project did not take over. They delivered several projects with the same philosophy that it's a design-centric delivery. It's never and across continents. So it is not geography specific. It could be anywhere. It can be very much in India. It's not that it's one of this is in Brazil, Sao Paulo in Brazil. So it is in emerging markets, located in emerging markets, located in highly Western thing. For example, one of them is in Berlin, other was in Washington. So it's not geography specific. You can have a design-centric development anywhere in the world. It still works. So this is another project which is located in south of Mumbai. The example that I've chosen is, this is perhaps the most expensive real estate project in India. A 3,000 square feet carpet apartment in this building sells for, let's say, 42 crores. So why am I talking about this most expensive real estate when I'm talking about design sensitivity? This is a classic example that how design adds value. This is designed by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill out of New York. I was driving the design in this project. So when I first took them on, everybody said this fee alone was $1 million of the fee for a very small building, just 1 lakh square feet. First, I had to convince them to accept this small project because of whatever track record, my track record, I would say I managed to convince them to accept this project. Then I had to convince the developers. You're talking about $1 million. You will get any number of architects to design, maybe work at 1/10 of this. So I, with great difficulty, I convinced the promoter it's worth having these guys, even though it cost $1 million. Now we paid top dollars for design. On my gut feeling that good design does get value. It depends on how you're able to communicate, and also how do you get the design? Yes, how do you able to communicate? So finally, think about all the discussion on money. For me, the reason why I said this is because here is a classic case where good design makes good business sense as well. It is because of the good design that you're able to get that value, which makes it the most expensive real estate in India. It's in Mumbai, South Mumbai. So it is not, as I said, it's not mutually exclusive. You can have great design, which is also very profitable to the client and to whoever is the end user as well. So that is where this is the Carmichael residence. This is 2 images, one on the left, the wooden screens, perfectly designed wooden screens. So they open up when you need more light and so on. And then the image on the right is when everything moves back and the entire building is covered by a wooden grill. One on the left is some part is open, part is closed, and so on. Some more images of the same building and some images from the indoors. Absolutely fascinating pool on the top. This is what I said. This is the cost of this project. As I said, and again, this is sold in my thing. The transaction, the sale happened during the pandemic. So it's nothing to do with what, even in times of pandemic, I said there is value to be had for good design. So this was sold, most of it was sold during the pandemic. So that's my presentation for the day. Thank you. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you. Thank you, Bhargav.
Oh, that was so absorbing, Raja. I mean, I wish you could have continued, but anyway, I think with some questions, I guess you can add some more experiences, some learning outcomes for not just all of us, but even you may have as a professional, you know. So one of the questions here says, one of the questions says, uh, Raja sir, which has been, I think, of the two, the Carmichael residences and the Hyderabad experience that you shared with us, uh, what sort of learnings as not just architects, but generally designers, when you deal with people, which you may like to share with upcoming designers or architects, like what makes someone successful? So that's what somebody's asking, if it's possible to answer.
Yep, I think it's a good question.
Yeah.
Though I would see both these projects are different. One in terms of scale, of course, very different. In terms of geography is very different. In terms of developers, very different. One which is the Hyderabad project, is a very big developer, global size. So they have a vision which is global, of course. And so they can afford to wait. They can do a 400-acre project, takes years to uh, come up. This is the other one is a smaller project. But what ties both of them together is the fact that one can have design as a centric, not see most often many of these projects nobody was talking about the cost of delivery is never forgotten, but it's not driving the design. Design, every designer knows that you have to deliver within a certain cost, within a time, within a schedule, all that is given. But both of them are very similar in that sense. So I would each one only difference is the scale to my extent. That one could be realized in a much shorter time. One, of course, project like that will take longer. And also we worked on a situation where we thought in a residential development, we had to decide what is the area where you can where you can influence. What is an area you need for development wherein you can influence, your design can influence a neighborhood. Right. And some studies showed us that we need to have at least 400 acres if you want a design to really influence the life of people who are living in that community. Yeah. So it's just not that one building you do, the next door, then nothing. No, on the other side, there's nothing like the one in South Mumbai. In there, we thought design, if it is spread over a 400 years and sensitivity is 400 acres of it, then it makes a huge difference to people who are living in that community. Just one building, obviously, it's only inside your house, it won't make a difference, not your life. 400 acres in that sense was very different because that was a scale in which you thought will make a difference to the life of the people, not both inside and outside their house. And it had work offices, as well. So that's the only difference between the two. Both are equally interesting. Right. Of course, purely successful business-wise, obviously, is the smaller projects, the less risky. Bigger projects are going to be more risky, but that more to do with the political risk associated with, at one time associated with certain places in India, where not it was not as smooth sailing. It was nothing to do with the design or anything else. Right. Oh yeah, okay. That's interesting, and I think that answers the question fairly well. And here is another one which says, designing for countries outside India and designing within the Indian context. Are there any techniques, any differences in terms of both administration as well as the technical side of it? That means the designing side of it. I would say no and yes in that order. Right. Largely, both these projects very interesting. They did not have any architects who had earlier. SOM had done the airport in Mumbai, but other than that, they had not worked in India before. So they were new to this geography. Right. So why were they able to deliver in spite of this geography? Is because it's one part of design is a process-driven design. Right. But they knew what is going to be a client-centric. Everybody, all the architects knew at the end of the day, delivering for a market, delivering for a client, delivering for a developer. They all understood what the objectives of the developers are. Yes, they want to be associated with iconic buildings. They want to be working with great architects. But yes, it's also that they want to be their business profitable. So as long as I think everybody's aligned to the objective of the project, which is not just design is just one part of it. Iconic design is only part of it. But as long as everybody is aligned to the objective, the larger objective of the project, and everybody is sensitive to each other's requirements, I think it doesn't really matter where the project is, whether it is a project could easily fail in the US as much as it could be successful in India. So it's not that every real estate project in the US is a successful project. So projects fail everywhere. So but succeed everywhere as well. So I think they largely do with the alignment with the objective. Right. And as long as the objectives are aligned, I think it doesn't matter which geography you're working in.
Yeah. One more, at least, thing that comes to my mind is architecture. I personally see it as I'd say as a much bigger aspect of design. I mean, it's a mother of like, let's say, design projects, in the sense that it incorporates not just building sciences but interiors, product designing, communication, a bit of fabric designing, you know. So these kind of other design professionals often have to interact with architects. Are there any special or anything you might like to advise to the other designers who have to work with architects? Like, any tips, any like thoughts or ideas for that? Because we have these departments, we don't have architecture, but we have the other departments who closely can work with architects.
It's good question, Bhargav. I think most of
Right.
us would have seen,
Yes.
most of us who have seen the Mumbai airport, for example.
Oh, yes.
Yes, Skidmore Rowing design the
The
building,
T2. Yes.
right? The T2 terminal. But what you see, what all of us
Skidmore.
experience in the building, experience as a user in the building, is
Right.
largely because of all the other designers who are involved in the project.
Right.
Essentially, they built, let's say, the skeleton, so to speak.
Right.
But you see, what has been going into that space? So many, there are textile designer, this designer, all of them were involved under the leadership of what is this guy? The designer Rajat, no, what?
Raj, who?
The Delhi-based guy was earlier. He was the design director. The interior, the entire thing. He put together all the artists, the sculptors, and all that
yes,
together.
Yes.
So it is the experience of the airport experience in T2 is not Skidmore's and Merrill's contribution alone.
Yes.
It is Rajat Sethi, whatever his name is.
No, it's Rajiv Sethi.
Rajiv Sethi.
Sethi.
Rajiv Sethi was a designer for this interiors of Mumbai airport.
Yes.
So Rajiv Sethi worked with SOM, but the experience in that airport is being put together by Rajiv Sethi, not by SOM.
Yes.
What touches most of us as a user is what been put together by Rajiv Sethi. If you see, artists are there, all kinds of people have been involved in that project.
Right.
So he was like a curator. And interestingly, the client, the airport client, had a design curator as well,
right,
as part of their team. So it was not just architects, engineers, and all those people. So there was a client had a curator working with Rajiv Sethi,
right,
and working all the other aspects of design other than engineering and architecture. Right. And that's what you see is what most of it is what Rajiv Sethi has done.
Right,
right. It's more intimate than what other work XOM has done, because it's a classic example of collaboration. Yes, in fact, I would say in terms of experience, the contribution of the other designers like Rajiv Sethi's team is far more than perhaps Skidmore's and Merrill in terms of consumer, customer, user experience.
However, I think it must be a very synergistic, happening, which ultimately makes T2 the way it is today, the Terminal 2, right, of the Mumbai airport. Yeah, I think that's very well said, Raja. We have two more questions, if you can address them. They are simple. One is from SN. Now, this takes you to the Telapur Integrated Township. So it says, though it's been one of the most interesting projects, despite being designed so well, with so many people working on it, what caused it not to take off in the end? I mean, is there anything like that? It didn't take off in the end?
No. I mean, I see. It's a natural question. Gotcha. If it is all that great, why didn't they take off? The reason, see, Hyderabad, unfortunately, Hyderabad went through a certain kind of disturbances during the time. This was around 2008. There
Right.
was a lot of political instability. The
Uh,
prices dropped in Hyderabad. So there was
yes.
a market which was suddenly became, before the formation of the Telangana state, there was a period in Hyderabad in particular where a lot of uncertainty was there about the political uncertainty. There used to be buns and all. If I don't know if people recollect, there used to be buns. All this
Uh,
glass buildings used to have nets across
yeah,
the
yeah,
buildings
yeah,
and all
yeah,
that.
yeah.
So this was just bad timing for this developer.
Uh-huh.
Because it was a gungo time at one time, Hyderabad, everybody was
Yes.
going to Hyderabad. It's just
Right.
that something went wrong in the market, nothing to do with the developer, nothing to do with the
Right.
design.
Uh-huh.
Absolutely I mean, this is nothing to do
Yeah,
with any.
it was more
It's
political. I mean,
political.
yeah, situations. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So no developer, after investing so much money,
Correct.
can
Yeah, yeah,
sit back for 3-4 years. So they
yeah.
decided to, I mean, it didn't
Uh,
take off because they decided to exit
okay, okay.
the project because the visibility as to when it will
Right.
start
Uh,
and when things will settle was not very clear.
right, right, right. And the other one from Kashish Agarwal says, I think to some extent you have answered it, but let's revisit it and see if there is anything new which can be answered from this. So he says mostly architects, designers, they like get chance to showcase their big projects. But what about interiors, product, graphic designers? Do they get a chance to make a huge difference in the environment? So, well, I guess they do. I mean, it all depends on how you present it. Anyway, Raja, your take on it. So,
Yes, in fact, I think I
yeah,
gave you the example of T2,
yes,
the classic
yes,
example.
right.
See, finally, the interior designers and all the other things that go into
They
it
got it. Yes,
is what is intimate to the consumer. See, the picture that I showed you of the building from outside, it doesn't really matter to the guy who's occupying an apartment. What
yeah,
matters to him, what is inside his house. Yes,
yeah,
outside and all, it looks good and all that. For
right.
example, let's say the wooden grill, if it
Yeah,
doesn't move the way it's supposed to move, it gets
uh-huh.
stuck in the reins. There are certain pulleys that are going into those. No, if for
Yes,
example, I'm saying in this case, the tracks were buried under the floor. We didn't want the
right,
tracks to come out of the floor.
right.
This kind of detailing is, there are other people who are working on this, working with the
Uh,
manufacturing company that is doing your sections for windows.
yes,
Imagine, most of us have seen the tracks above ground. Here, the
right.
tracks are buried into the ground, so
Uh,
that you don't see the tracks. So tracks get water. How do you take the water out? The
right.
bearings have to be designed because
Uh,
the heavy wooden doors are not available. Somebody has to make sure that the bearings are designed in such a way that
yes,
huge screens move, and they move. It's not just for 1 year, it's going to be moving the
right.
life of the project.
Yes,
So these are the people, that so many other people are involved in the project.
yes.
And these are the people who actually make a difference. If the wooden
They
screen
make
gets
the
stuck, it doesn't
right.
matter how your building looks good or you have a pool on
Yes,
the terrace. That makes no difference. The end user, as far as the
yes,
user is concerned, is whether the grill is getting stuck or not stuck.
right. It's
So
a
in
design.
fact,
Yeah,
more intimate things are being more and more important, I think.
correct. Absolutely. So the designers working behind the curtains are as important as those working uh,
Yes,
in
no,
front.
I
Yeah.
remember having so many meetings with those guys who were designing the aluminum, the sections
Yes.
for the windows, doors and windows.
Yes.
They were
Yes.
not architects. They were sometimes
Yes.
engineers, sometimes product
Yes.
designers.
Yes. It takes all professions to really make a project successful because
Yeah.
it is a sum total of all. Anyway, I think Raja, we've
Yeah.
this has been a very very enlightening session, and there's a lot for everyone here to take back home, think over it, reflect upon it, and um, I'm sure you would have also equally enjoyed,
Yes.
giving the session.
Yeah.
So before I finally, we bid farewell for the time being, I'll tell the viewers that we still have one more week to go, starting on the 11th of July. So we'll have 3 more sessions in design leadership. So be absolutely prepared for that. They'll be equally engaging, insightful, and you'll have a very good learning from it. So with that, thank you, Raja, so much for being with us, and all the best for your future endeavors.
Thank you. Thank you, Bhargav. Thank you, all the
Right.
participants. Have fun. Enjoy.
Right.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks. Yeah.